Van used to be an exhausted office worker, grinding 24/7, yet somehow ending up broke as a joke by the end of the month. However, his life turned a new page when he unexpectedly reincarnated into the body of a tiny noble toddler. Van was bewildered by this brand new environment because his last memory was dragging his carcass home after work, but at the same time, he vaguely remembered being born here for some reason. The little guy toddled over to the window to get some fresh air, but just as he popped up, the maid Till rushed over to block him, fearing the young master would faceplant down below and it would be game over. Van also had memories of Till and his family here, so he closed the deal immediately. This must be one of those reincarnation gigs people always gossip about. Till found it incredibly magical that the young master spoke fluently and clearly, even though he was barely a 2-year-old brat. But she reassured herself that maybe the young master just suddenly enlightened early or something. That noon, Van had lunch with the family. His dad, Jalpa, started the interrogation session asking what everyone planned to do today, and most said they would go grind magic. So Jalpa turned to Van and asked what his plan was. Van calmly stated, "I want to learn about the history and culture of this country." Jalpa was thrilled because Van's mature answer meant he would surely inherit the family's badass fire attribute. But hearing the old man praise Van to the skies made his brothers start to get jealous. In this world, there are many types of magic, but nobles consider attack magic to be true love. That afternoon, the head butler hauled a mountain of books over and announced that Van would be under his academic management from now on. You'd think with past life knowledge, studying would be easy game. But except for math, learning the otherworld language and history was tough as nails. But the comforting thing is that there is no wholly integral calculus here. 2 years flew by, and Van started basic sword training with Till. However, when the head maid discovered Till's sassy attitude, she was made to accept punishment. While everyone urged Van to punish her severely, Van didn't see the need. But due to noble rules, in the end, Van flicked Till's forehead with a light thwack and said, "That's enough punishment." A year later, Van turned 5. He had gotten used to controlling this tiny body, so he could solo evenly with older kids. The kids were amazed because Van was small but skilled, and also way too friendly even though they were just commoners. After training, Van went to a tree to rest. But a few minutes later, the night captain named D came over to chat. This guy was strongly impressed by Van's sword skills. So he offered to be his PT. But Van said he was busy studying with Mr. Esparta. D said he would help change the schedule, but Van had a hunch that training swords all day would be even more disastrous, so he asked to keep the current schedule. Since Van decided so, D didn't force it, but still sealed the deal that whenever Van wasn't studying with Esparta, D would personally teach him. Van had no way to refuse, so he asked Mr. D to go easy, and D agreed. But when training started, D went bloodthirsty, with zero chill. The whole day passed like that, and Van started wondering why a monster like D existed, because his concept of resting was doing air squats during the break. The training was soul-crushingly harsh, but Van had to admit it was kind of fun. However, after a year of following that brutal study and training schedule, Van was about to burn out. He wished he could go out and play like a normal kid. So Till told him he was allowed to take a day off if he wanted. Hearing that felt like a burden lifted, he said he wanted to go to the market because he had never been. And upon arrival, he was totally overwhelmed because it was insanely crowded. Till educated the young master that this was the largest market in the kingdom, and behind them was the Merry Merchant Guild. Just then, Van saw a man dragging a boy along. Van asked what was up, and the guy got grumpy, but seeing the bodyguards around Van, he changed his attitude immediately. He explained he was selling his son into slavery. Van was shocked because everyone treated this as normal. Till said this was a daily meal for poor families. Just then, a Merchant Guild employee ran out and recognized Van as the Marquis' 4th son. She warmly welcomed him and asked what Van needed. Van asked her to appraise that boy. Looking briefly, the kid was pretty meh, so Rosalie asked if he had any skills. The dad said his son had theft magic. So Rosalie finalized the price at less than 3 silver coins. The dad got furious and took it out on the boy. Rosalie intervened, but he didn't listen, even threatening to sell him elsewhere. Before he left, Van spoke up, 5 silver coins, sell? The guy closed the deal immediately, cash in hand, porridge in mouth. Van walked over, cut the ropes, and asked for his name. The boy said his name was Kamsin. Van declared, "From now on, you're free, go wherever you like." Till and everyone were shocked because they thought Van bought him to run errands. But since Kamsin had nowhere to go, Van offered to take him back to the mansion. The trouble was, to enter, Kamsin had to be Van's slave. Van wasn't into this, but seeing Kamsin agree, he accepted the master-servant contract. Rosalie helped the two make the contract. When done, a mark appeared on Kamsin's hand, proving the contract was complete. Normally there's a fee, but since it was Van's first time at the market, she gave it for free. A few weeks later, Van was back home, and Kamsin had gotten used to the role of Van's personal assistant. But today he reported news that struck like lightning. He said Mr. D was hunting Van down for extra training today. Van was scared out of his wits of old D. So he bribed Kamsin with a cookie and asked him to cover for him. Kamsin was willing to do anything for Van. So when D came looking, Kamsin lied that Van wasn't there. D knew the kid was lying, but respecting the guts to lie to someone like him. So, unluckily for Kamsin, D took a liking to him and decided to grab him by the neck to train in Van's place. The boy was dragged away in misery. Another year passed, and Van was about to turn 8. The whole village waited to see what magic he would get when appraised. Van's family was famous for wind or fire aptitude. So everyone was sure he would awaken some badass attack magic. However, on Judgment Day, the result turned out that Van had 0 attack magic. Instead, he possessed production magic, and his dad flew into a rage because this type was considered trash, the most useless of all magic types. It requires gathering enough materials first, and you have to have a clear image of the production process in your head. In short, just forging a sword takes a hell of a lot of effort. Jalpa believed Van was now a national disgrace to the family. So he drew his sword intending to send off his son right there. But at the last second, Mercia, the only brother who actually liked Van, rushed out to block Van and told the old man, "Wait, hold up about 2 seconds." Mercia subtly reminded Jalpa about the godforsaken village they had neglected for so long. It was located at the very border of the territory, with only a measly 100 people, no specialties, basically low value. But because it was so remote, the people there weren't loyal to the family either. So Mercia proposed exiling Van there as a proxy lord to win over the people for the family. This deal was clearly better than killing the kid, and Jalpa agreed. So he told Van to pack his stuff and disappear from this mansion as soon as possible, or else don't blame him for being cruel. When Jalpa and the others left, Mercia turned to apologize profusely to Van for not being able to help more. But considering the old man's obsession with magic, this was the best possible outcome. Van thanked Mercia for carrying the team for him, and Mercia promised to support Van to the best of his ability. The next morning, Van began packing to go into exile. Till couldn't believe the Marquis would banish his son to a godforsaken place just because of his magic type. But Van said he was actually looking forward to this. Being a lord in a remote place meant there would probably be nothing to do. So finally, he could enjoy a peaceful life of raising fish and growing more vegetables. His dad strictly forbade him from taking any knights, but thanks to Mercia, he hired about 10 adventurers to help move his stuff. Just then, Till ran out breathlessly and said she wanted to go with Van. Van thought that was okay. But then, surprise surprise, Mr. D also appeared and demanded to follow to continue torturing Van with training. Van wasn't keen on this at all. He reminded D that the old man forbade knights from following, but D played deaf. The butler also decided to pack his bag and go with Van too. So when everything was done, the group set off for the border village. This was supposed to be done in secret because Jalpa didn't want anyone to know he exiled his son. But unfortunately, the people loved Van too much, so they recognized him immediately when he left and poured into the streets to give him a grand send-off. That is the end of episode 1. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. The episode kicks off with Van backpacking through the woods in a janky horse carriage. And by backpacking, I mean his family just kicked him out, stripped him of his noble title, and exiled him to a territory that's basically in the middle of nowhere. To stop himself from overthinking his life choices, Van decides to test his production magic, a skill his family called total trash, to see if his RNG, luck, is actually cracked today. After locking in and chanting some skibbity magic spells, boom, a sword spawns in Van's hand. But instead of a legendary blade, it's a microsword so tiny it's basically a toothpick for ants. His follower Kamsin is watching the whole time, but instead of roasting his boss, he stays stone-faced. Kamsin's vibe is basically, my boss is a natural, he learns faster than my ex switches up, nothing new here. That's the kind of stan energy you get when your follower has 100% faith in your main character energy. After that failed RNG test, Van hits a massive overthinking spiral. He looks at Kamsin and sighs, feeling like a certified loser with 0 gold and 0 clout. He tells the kid, "Look, I'm broke now. You don't have to stay on this grind with me. If I'm giving you the ick or you want a better contract elsewhere, just say the word and I'll delete your slavery bond right now so you can go live your best life." But since this is an Isekai, his main follower isn't going anywhere. Kamseen rejects the offer instantly, 0 loading time. The kid claims he's already all in on Van for life, and he's not just yapping for clout. Kamseen drops a line straight out of a fanfic, "I'll literally catch a body for you, no matter what." Van just nods, low-key terrified that his #1 fan is this intense. Suddenly, the carriage brakes so hard everyone almost gets folded. Van peeks out and sees a village getting raided by mercenaries. The guards are like, probably just some mid-tier bandits looking for a quick meal. D, the team's certified hitter, checks the map and counts about 50 enemies. He's ready to full send it. This is a free win, let's just jump them and clear the map, easy game. But Ortho, the adventurer they hired, starts gatekeeping the contract. He goes full HR mode. Actually, the JD says we only protect Van if he's in danger. Van is currently full HP, miles away from the mosh pit, and nobody is targeting him. Why would we risk our K/D ratio for free? D is absolutely tilted. He's like, if y'all are scared, I'll solo. I'm not letting these NPCs get uninstalled from the server right in front of me. I'll 1v50 if I have to. Just as D is about to go full Yasuo mode, Espada, the big brain butler/mage, shuts it down. He tells D he's low IQ for wanting to crash out like that, especially since D is a high-tier asset for the kingdom. If D gets deleted here, the army's meta is cooked. Being a high yellow mage, Espada draws up a pro play strat. He'll build a defensive wall to protect Van, while the adventurers camp behind it and spam long-range damage to thin out the mobs. Once the enemies are tilted and focusing on the wall, D and the squad will flank from the right for a backstab. Espada is sure it's a 100% win rate if they follow the script. However, Van spots a bug in the plan. For the bait to work, Espada has to stay behind, and if they don't have a proper tank, the whole team might get wiped. Van feels the weight of the situation. He knows if they lose a strategist like Espada, his future lore is over. So, Van steps up, "I'll be the bait. I'm the MC, I've got plot armor anyway." Till and Kamseen try to stop him, but Van uses his warm CEO voice to calm everyone down. His plan, he'll drive the carriage straight into the enemy team to pull aggro while the squad spams skills from afar. He tells them he's been practicing his blade riz for years, but deep down, he's ready to log out for the cause. Seeing Van ready to risk it all makes Ortho stop and buffer for 5 seconds. Van reminds him of his past back at the guild when he hated nobles and thought they were all trash tier and selfish. But then he remembers Van once bowed and thanked him so sincerely it made him blush. Ortho realizes, wait, not all nobles are mid like I thought. Ortho pulls a massive U-turn, stands in front of Van, and says, "Sit down, kid. We aren't letting a middle schooler crash out like that." D and Espada join in, and they update the strat on the fly. The raid begins. Espada spawns a wall instantly, creating a cracked defense. Then comes the arrow rain, deleting the first wave of bandits in one frame. While the bandits are still lagging, D and Ortho dive in from both sides, slicing through them like butter. But in the chaos, the final boss of the bandits breaks through and tries to gank the support team. He's about to hit plural when Van saves the day at the last second. With a perfect sword flex, Van hits the boss's Achilles heel, making him drop to his knees. Kamseen immediately KS, steals the boss, ending the threat. After the fight, the bandits are tied up like sausages. Ortho is officially down bad for Van's leadership. He's so curious about Van that he decides to stay and see how the lore develops instead of taking another contract. His whole squad agrees to stay and help Van build his empire. Once things settle, Van officially debuts as the new lord. The village elder, Rondo, starts crying and trauma dumping about how the village gets raided constantly because they're the forgotten children of the kingdom. Van feels bad for the NPCs, so he promises to be the big boss here and stop the bullying. He drops 3 strats. 1. Produce god-tier gear so the kingdom can't ignore them. 2. Farm gold to hire mercenaries. 3. Buff the villagers so they can hold their own. The villagers are still like, is this cap? So Espada and D have to flex their high-level profiles as the kingdom's general and head butler. Only then do the villagers start to stan. But the real shocker is the taxes. When they complain about the 36% tax rate, Van pulls a pro-gamer move and slashes it to 10%. To Van, keeping the NPCs happy is more important than farming gold right now. The villagers are literally crying, worshipping Van like a god. For security, Espada spawns a stone wall around the village and adds a moat for extra defense stats. Van tells them, trust the process, this village is about to get a glow up. Then, Van's production itch kicks in. He uses his magic to create nanotech wooden blocks. Ortho tries to chop one and literally chips his sword while the block has 0 scratches. Van spends the day crafting meta weapons for everyone. Even though it burns mana, Van acts like he has infinite energy hacks. The next morning, Van starts stacking his nanobricks. Elder Rondo suggests building a mansion on this specific plot, and Van is hyped. He uses his magic to analyze every single pixel of the land. Once he masters the tutorial, Van activates his magic. Everyone's jaw drops as Van spawns a giga mansion that looks like a palace in the blink of an eye. Everyone is shook at this game hack, and Van just scratches his head like, my bad, I went a bit too extra, I meant to build a normal house but accidentally built a castle. Truly main character behavior, everything has to be extra or nothing at all. Right after that, the whole village went shocked Pikachu face, totally standing Van's cracked bricklayer skills. Young Van was low-key vibing with this side talent, but in his head, he still wished he had a combat build to gatekeep his territory properly. Having the strength to throw hands is the real main character energy needed to protect his squad. After all, however, the villagers immediately shut that down. They said living on this kid's land is 10,000 times better than being under the thumb of that loser Jalpa. Right then, the butler Espada spawned in and dropped a hard truth. Van isn't wrong. But what the people actually crave is a lord who knows how to upgrade the squad's lifestyle, so this seat was basically made for Van, no cap. The uncle also nodded in agreement, saying he never dreamed this kid could print a whole house in a split second like that. The adventurers watching were also completely shook, realizing Van's magic had totally outscaled regular, bottom-tier production magic. Seeing the hype rising, Van rallied everyone to go get some wood, promising to build free houses for everyone. Both the villagers and the soldiers were full of fire energy, wanting to set up houses right here, right now. Suddenly, the villagers shyly asked Van if he could build houses for all of them if they handled the wood part. They complained that their old houses were straight up trash, wind blowing through every side and rain leaking like they were outdoors. Van knew this deal would be a massive grind and a huge time sink, but looking at the houses about to collapse, his lordly conscience wouldn't let him ignore it, so he decided to go big and start a rural revolution, one house per family. Van believed if his Tetris skills made everyone happy, then this was the path of truth. After a period of grinding, Van finished building new houses throughout the village and renovated the ones that were still savable. Some houses were total wreckage, but after Van touched them, they became brand new designer homes. The people saw his magic and could only stare in disbelief. Van casually explained that this was just basic knowledge. He planned the housing into groups of 4, with roads expanded in a super scientific grid layout. The houses followed a template so nobody would get salty or jealous. For now, this will do. Van promised that in the future, when they find high-tier stone, he'll demolish and rebuild everything to look more luxury. The villagers were over the moon hearing that. Not only that, Van also conveniently built a simple public bathhouse right next to the mansion. The main goal was for him to have a chill soak, but everyone ended up loving the idea. Construction was easy as pie, thanks to little Pluriel using water magic to fill the tub, while the homie Campson used fire and wood for manual water heating. Some bold girls invited Van to bathe with them, making him turn red and reject them immediately. When they stepped inside, everyone was obsessed. A female adventurer exclaimed that she didn't expect Van to simp for his villagers this much. The Maytil took the chance to flex, praising her master as the G.O.T. noble, listing his pros. Would take all day. After that, it was Van's turn to bathe with his bestie Campson. While soaking, Van noticed his friend was already gaining muscle at such a young age and felt a bit jealous. His friend humbly said that compared to the uncle, this was nothing. Van nodded. Standing next to a beast like that uncle makes everyone look weak. Just as they were talking smack, the uncle suddenly spawned in and asked, "Did you call me?" Van tried to dip fast but got caught and forced to bathe together for the vibes. After the relaxation session, Van decided to hit the hay early to keep grinding tomorrow. At the crack of dawn, Van woke up early with the knights to start digging a moat. He planned to two-tap the task, making it both a bath spot and a source of drinking water. Meanwhile, Espada used earth magic like some earth-style deep land parting jutsu, piercing 10 meters deep into the ground like he was using a cheat code. The sidekick Campson and everyone started digging manually, while Van followed behind, reinforcing the soil and the perimeter walls. Van noticed that Uncle D was working while laughing loudly with insane energy, wondering where he even got that power. Even Espada was confused. This guy is pushing 40 but his battery is still at 100%. Van figured it must be because he's doing good deeds to help the world, which would attract merchants to the village in the future, hence his hype. This is the core factor for a life glow up. After all, by afternoon, Van wanted to give the squad a break, but D shut it down, demanding to keep going because they were almost at the village. Van asked D to watch the assistants because they were about to shut down from exhaustion. D thought he was training the squad with a pro method, but he got reminded that overworking them is not it. Van realized with a shock that Uncle D still had a ton of energy left over. The next day, after so much grinding, they finished everything in just a few days. Van told Espada to open the water flow, and boom! Water in the village. Everyone was shook because the result was too perfect. The villagers threw a party because now they had plenty of water. However, there were concerns about flooding during heavy rain. Van dropped a strat to build a lake behind the village. Espada approved immediately, saying building a reservoir for the drought season was a pro move. Building this was easy as pie too. The old man in the village was fully satisfied because from now on he didn't have to hike to the river to fetch water. Van was also catching the vibes because the village now had an abundant water source. The next day, Van upgraded the city walls, combining soil and stone to create a compound as hard as reinforced concrete. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Now even if thieves tried to sneak in, they wouldn't be scared. Van wasn't done yet, deciding to buff security even more by crafting some simple god-tier crossbows with front shields attached, defending and counterattacking with arrows at the same time. Super legit. The people were impressed, realizing Van's magic was straight up spawn whatever you want. Van knew the village was still small, but now it was a billion times better than before. Espada was much more at ease because low-tier thieves had zero chance of infiltrating. Uncle D sighed, saying if only that loser Jalpa had seen this power sooner, the Marquis family would have risen like a kite in the wind. Van is cracked as both the lord and an assistant. Espada quickly silenced D, reminding him that the family head only stands muscle and punchy power. D clapped back immediately, saying Van's power is more than enough to throw hands, and might even be more broken than anyone. War isn't just about rushing in to kill, it's about the art of strategy too, you guys. Van ended the debate with a deep moral quote that hit different. Why compare talents when it's so lopsided? Everyone is born good, so just use whatever skill you have, guys. Right after the moral speech, the young master's stomach started protesting for its rights. So the maid had to hurry up and cook ASAP. Back at the house, the atmosphere was as gloomy as a funeral because there was nothing to do. Talk about idle hands or the devil's workshop. The butler Espada, or Espatada, started lecturing on a basic economics course. He said, "Young master, buffing the house for the squad is cool, but if the economy is negative infinity, it's all trash. There must be a stable income source. Currently, this village is as empty as a ghost town. Only one lost merchant passes through a month, and trade with the outside is a total zero." Van was still jokingly optimistic, saying why worry? Furniture can be 3D printed with magic, and food is homegrown and self-sufficient. Living the good life. Espada landed a critical hit on Van's foodie soul when he said, if we live like that, where are we going to get the imported sugar to make the sweets you're addicted to? Hearing about his sugar addiction being cut off, Van was truly salty. His business spirit flared up, and he determined to craft something to sell and start a startup to get rich right here. Right now, just stepping out to find ideas, Van ran into an adventurer flexing his newly bought shield. But as soon as he tapped it with a wooden sword to test its durability, the shield split in half like a bad breakup. Straight up cheap shoppy tier trash. But with his golden hands in the modding scene, Van reinforced the shield, turning it into a tanky masterpiece a billion times more durable than when it was first bought. Seeing Van had the skills, the adventurer immediately tried to cut a deal. Asking if he was interested in buying minerals, he explained that this forest sits at the foot of Wolfsburg Mountain, so it's crawling with dinosaur-level monsters. Probably because of that, they find high-tier loot like iron, copper, silver, and even gold without even having to climb. The whole squad was shook to the core when they found out these guys picked up mithril, basically platinum or black iron, a super rare pro-max mineral. Van went shocked Pikachu face, wondering why nobody had looted such a sweet spot yet. The adventurer replied that this place is the middle of nowhere. Regular people would log out instantly, and the risk is too high for anyone to mess with. Previously, probably only full-build knights dared to explore here. Van's brain started jumping numbers immediately. Turns out the village is surrounded by top-tier resources. He asked for some iron to test, using magic to filter impurities in one go easy game. The crowd was floored and challenged him to smith a sword. Van focused for a split second and printed a razor-sharp blade without breaking a sweat, making everyone scramble to place custom orders. Right then, Great Detective Espada spawned in. Seeing the mithril chunk, he dropped a hard truth. A regular forest having this hard-to-find rare loot means only one thing: there's a dungeon nearby. The adventurers were confused, asking, is there really a dungeon here? Espada said, who knows? I don't, but the butler continued his analysis. If there's a real dungeon, the meta changes, and our village will get a massive glow-up instantly. Dungeons are considered national treasures, filled with designer loot like clothes, jewelry, and rare items. When that happens, people will flock here, and trade will be booming. According to the law, the guild would have to open a branch in such a sweet spot immediately. Van understood the assignment. Finding a dungeon means the village's status skyrockets, but the struggle is real. The current village is tiny, so where would they fit all the adventurers, merchants, and warriors flooding in? Espada nodded in agreement, noting that neighboring countries would definitely catch the scent of a good deal and send troops to inhale the drama for profit. The bottom line, they need to start zoning, selling plots, and expanding the territory ASAP. It has to be done fast before his toxic dad back home smells the money and tries to interfere. So the whole team agreed to low-key keep the dungeon search on the down low. Staying stealth mode is the best strat. Just as they got home and barely had time to breathe, bad news hit. A pack of armored lizards was heading over to check their health. Van screamed to lift the city gates immediately. He mobilized the whole squad to defend the tower. determined to keep the fortress from collapsing, and so, another episode ends here. Hope you guys found it hooked. If you enjoyed it, remember to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel to wait for the next content. Bye bye. The Kid Van demands that Old Man D use those divine crossbows immediately to stop the monster swarm. The guards are beyond scared, saying, "Bro, their shells are hard as rocks, regular weapons just snap on contact, we can't do anything." D is low-key hesitant but decides to claim the order anyway. He remembers all the life or death battles where he got trashed but still caught the W. Now, he decides to put all his faith in the feng shui master Van. He screams, "Load the ammo for your daddy right now." As soon as the first shot fires, D is completely shook. The arrow pierces straight through the monster as smooth as butter, no matter how tanky its hide is. But reality hits different. The soldiers report, "Boss, every crossbow has exactly one bolt left, we're out of ammo." D starts sweating bullets. The situation is tense as hell. At this point, Van flips on big brain mode. The second wave was cleared, but what happens now that they're out of ammo? The kid's brain spawns a plan: use wooden arrows. My guys, the knights look at each other like, is this kid tripping? Iron bolts barely worked. Are wooden ones just supposed to tickle them? But D stays firm, shouting, "Trust Van. He's carried this village several times, he's not trying to bait us." D remembers how Van carried the team against the bandits and boosted the village's status overnight, so D orders the wooden bolts to be loaded. Thud thud thud. The result is straight up fake news magic. The armored monsters drop like flies, hitting the floor in heaps. The whole squad is shocked out of their minds, then starts cheering like they just hit the jackpot. With spirits high, the soldiers joke while firing. After this win, let's have a grilled lizard skewer feast to celebrate. In no time, the monsters are completely wiped out, easy as cake. Casualty report, basically zero, just one guy with a light scratch. He feels like this victory is so easy it's fictional. He's convinced Van is going to be a big boss in the future, no cap. After the battle, the whole village gathers to loot. The lizard skins are stripped clean, and the eyes and fangs are kept as rare items. Organs are trashed. But they gotta dig out every single magic core. This massive pile of meat would normally rot and smell funky, but thanks to the custom tier knives crafted by Van, the butchering process is smoother than a hair commercial. Seeing there's too much meat to finish, Van decides to throw a massive victory festival to celebrate his first win. The villagers are over the moon because it's the first time in their lives they've had a feast of delicious meat and top-tier beer. An old man looks at the scene with teary eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day a noble like Van would be sitting here laughing and drinking with commoners like us." Espada thinks it's a bit sus. But whatever, Van's personality has always been a little out there. The adventurers are also raving about the lizard meat, saying it's fire. While everyone is vibing, D gets hit with some thunderbolt news. Van is giving out free swords to all the adventurers except for him. Talk about salty. Seeing this, the knights also start low-key begging Van to craft swords for them too. Van's like, "Chill out, my guys, I'm not even taking commissions for cash right now." People start gossiping. Selling one of these lizards to a merchant usually bags around 20 gold, but since there's so much meat and transport costs are high-key expensive, the profit after expenses is probably around 8 gold per head. Van does the math, 40 lizards means over 300 gold. The smell of money is sweet. But Espada throws a bucket of cold water on him. "Young master, according to the law, if the village income exceeds 100 gold, we have to fork over 50% to the Marquis." Van thought about gatekeeping the profits, but Espada was like, "How the hell are you gonna hide this massive amount of loot?" Van isn't greedy for the cash, but he's scared that if his dad finds out this village is a gold mine, he'll try to hijack it or move Van somewhere else. That would be the end of his peaceful life. Espada drops a big brain plan. "How about we give the credit to Master Merca? Say he was the one who deleted the monsters. He's thirsty for titles to flex on the old man anyway. It's a win-win for everyone." Van nods instantly, order claimed. A while later, a merchant caravan stops by. One guy is totally confused. "Wait, this is that middle of nowhere border village? Why is it so high tier?" Van spawns in and introduces himself as the Lord. The whole squad is shook when they find out Van is the Marquis' fourth son, the former prodigy who drifted all the way to this remote place. Entering the village and seeing mountains of lizard meat pile up, the merchants catch a second L in shock. "You beat all of these? Their scales are hard as diamonds, right?" Van asks, "You buying or what, uncles?" The merchants respond, "We're buying hard. Let me call up the 500 homies to come haul this away. They asked to come back in a month." Van says okay but warns them the meat won't stay fresh forever, so he gives them a free sample so they know how good it hits. Next, Van takes the chance to advertise his swords. "Check out this gear, uncles, is it sellable? Give me a shout out." The merchants try to pull an exclusive deal move, but Van catches their bait immediately. Van's like, don't be selfish, let's sell together and have fun, I'll build you a shop right here, you only get rich when you have a business squad. No sooner said than done. Van uses magic to build the shop in a snap. The merchants are completely stunned by his ultra-speed construction skills. Scene change, Espada is discussing urban planning with Van. Espada, young master, you better start thinking about building a city for 10,000 residents already. We need that strategic vision. Van, isn't 1,000 enough, uncle? Espada, enough my ass. With this growth rate, we need massive manpower just to manage the grind. Van nods. So what kind of fortress do you want to build? Espada, usually people build square walls. Van, nah, that's too basic, let's go with a star shape. Uncle, if the enemy wants to hit the center, they gotta take the corners first. And if they try to climb the walls, they'll get sniped from 3 sides, nowhere to run. After hearing that, Espada has to shout, young master, your brain is actually gigasized. Right when spirits are high, news comes in, an envoy from the neighboring land of Count Ferdinand is arriving. Van steps up and introduces himself like a total gentleman. The blonde woman introduces herself as Panamera, a newly appointed viscountess after being knighted. The girl with her introduces herself as Alt, the youngest daughter of Count Ferdinand, here on her dad's orders to say hi to Van. Van thanks them profusely for traveling so far to this middle-of-nowhere place. Panamera scans Van from head to toe, noting that this kid looks younger than Alt but has the old soul vibe for real. She asks Van if he can guess the reason why she's here. Van calmly replies, I guess you're here to scout the situation and look for a chance to play peacekeeper, right? Panamera bursts out laughing, not expecting an 8-year-old to have deductions as sharp as Conan. She confirms, straight facts. Old Count Ferdinand suspected that the kid put in charge of this sensitive border was a mole for Marquis Furcio, a bad omen of territorial expansion ambitions. But there's one sus point, a prodigy kicked out of the house and exiled to the border? The most logical reason can only be, Van has 0 talent for the 4 basic magic elements. Van knows the cover is blown, so he just confesses, exactly, I have 0 connection to those 4 elements, but those conspiracy theories are totally wrong, I really did get kicked out by the old man. Panamera is like, Cap. Who are you trying to kid? A tiny village with barely 100 people, but walls are spawning like mushrooms, houses have modern designs, and the planning is high-key aesthetic like a city from the future. According to her experience, to pull this off you'd need to mobilize at least 5,000 troops. Clearly, it's meant to be a military base. Van hears that and starts laughing like crazy. He explains through tears, the old man let me take only the clothes on my back in a trashy carriage. When I left, not a single soul in the house even came out to say goodbye, let alone soldiers. She catches a second L in shock, asking where all the butlers, knights, and maids came from. Then Van answers simply but deeply, they believe in my future. They believe this place is actually gonna cook something up. To prove he wasn't capping, Van decided to do a live demo. He turned to Espada, Uncle Espada, gear up. The old man immediately unleashed a gigasized magic barrier. Both ladies were shook, especially when they realized this butler was a pro at all 4 basic elements. Alt curiously asked what Van's magic actually was. Van answered without a second thought, production magic, the stuff everyone gossips is the most trash-tier skill on earth. This reveal left Panamera frozen. That bottom-tier magic could pull off all of this? Van explained, the second this magic spawned, the old man kicked me out. He didn't even give it time to show how broken it actually is. Panamera heard that and felt beyond salty on his behalf. If the Marquis' power combined with Van's game-breaking skill, that family would have officially ruled the world. Even though she was low-key tilted for him, she started to understand the situation. She revealed the real motive. She was tasked with pushing the engagement between Van and Alt. The old count wanted to marry off his daughter to shut down any potential war. Van honestly replied, I just want to build walls, farm the fields, and grow this village. I have 0 interest in fighting anyone. If everyone understands that, then why bother with the marriage drama? Panamera confessed she originally opposed this move hard. Marrying Alt off to a kid lord in a dangerous, lacking border zone surrounded by monsters felt like sending her to her death. She actually came here to cancel the deal. But after meeting Van, she did a total 180. If the future husband is Van, she's supporting it with both hands and feet. A genius with vision and this much maturity is a straight-up premium catch. She even joked, too bad you're so tiny, or else I'd snatch you up as my own husband. Van was over the moon after getting complimented like that. When asked for their opinions, both Van and Alt agreed, it's way too early, let's just take it slow and get to know each other first. The two decided to stay in the village for the night. In just a few hours, Van used his Minecraft skill again, building an inn in a snap, leaving them wide-eyed once more. After dinner, Panamera went to bed. While Alt shyly approached Van to thank him, she breathed a sigh of relief because she thought she'd be forced to marry, but luckily escaped that fate. After saying her piece, she vanished into her room out of embarrassment. Van sat alone in deep thought. Even without elemental magic, he knew his journey to becoming a big boss was just getting started. And that's the end of the show. Subscribe to the channel right now to catch the next episode. Bye bye. The next morning, Van was deep in his beauty sleep when those two kids, Till and Campson, dragged him out of bed. They were rushing him like the house was on fire, telling him to get to the lake ASAP because things were popping off. Van was barely awake and super salty about his nap being ruined, but since they kept nagging, he finally dragged his corpse along. When he got there, the villagers were already gathered, sipping tea and crowding the place like a swarm of locusts. Van pushed to the front and oh my god, there was a mermaid literally floating on the water, with just her head poking out. The stone-cold butler Espada explained that this is the Akalu tribe, a rare drop you only see once in a billion years. Van wondered why a legendary unit like this would suddenly drift into a local village pond. He tried to start a conversation, but the girl ghosted him hard, just staring blankly. Tilted by the cold shoulder, Van used the shortest path to the heart is through the stomach strat and handed her a plate of meat. The second she saw the loot, her eyes lit up and she swam over to secure the bag immediately. Van said bet. She took a bite and realized this wasn't mid-pork or chicken, it was designer-tier armored lizard meat. She asked who was the one who deleted this monster. The villagers were quick to spill the tea, snitching on Van and hyping his power level to the moon. Hearing that, the Akalu girl turned pale with fear and dove straight back to the lobby. Espada judged that it'd probably be a hot minute before they'd ever dare to come back. But Espada was capping hard. The next day, the entire Akalu village showed up at Van's lake, crowded like a music festival. Van was panicking hard, thinking they heard about his lizard-slaying reputation and came to worship him like some kind of god. Espada threw a bucket of cold water on him, telling him to stop being delusional because that wasn't it. A massive boss-tier guy with a main character interface named Latavesta, the Akalu chief, swam out to meet Van. He asked for a fact check. Did you really delete that lizard? Van nodded instantly. The whole fish squad underwater started inhaling the drama, shook to the core because they couldn't believe a kid who still looked like he drank formula could actually make salad out of that monster. Latavesta introduced the girl from yesterday as his daughter, Priora, and then claimed the order by marrying her off to him right then and there. Van was frozen for 5 seconds, looking at Priora's interface. She was clearly still a tiny kid who knew absolutely zero about marriage. Van asked Latavesta why he was suddenly gifting his daughter away. Was there a hidden plot? Latavesta nodded and just confessed. The tea is, the fish tribe had been getting fed L's by those armored lizards for years, living in constant fear. Hearing there was a big hand here who could wipe the monsters, he planned to use the honey trap to form an alliance and secure some life insurance for the villagers. Van finally got the picture. It wasn't about love, it was just a political marriage for protection. Understanding the situation, Van politely declined the wedding but made a word as bond promise to protect the Akalu tribe for free forever. Latavesta was shocked because Van was being too wholesome. Seeing the sweet deal, he pushed his luck and asked if the whole tribe could move in. Van said bet, then he flipped into Bob the Builder mode, and in a heartbeat, he finished building a giga-sized luxury resort for the fish squad. Latavesta was wide-eyed, unable to believe Van's game-breaking construction level. The Merfolk hadn't even been chilling in their new home for long when Espada reminded Van about the sewage situation. Van gave a mysterious smile and said, I've already calculated everything, honey. He had laid underground pipes under every house, now he just needs to flush the lake water and everything gets swept away, sparkling clean. Latavesta thought this whole flushing thing was a vibe and insisted the fish tribe take over the contract for it. Van told him not to be so extra, but the old man was determined to contribute to the village. Van finally gave in and let the young fish guys handle opening the floodgates every day. After finishing the job, Van thanked them profusely. Latavesta locked in the deal, saying they'd do this every day as their contribution. Right then, the two baddies Art and Panamera dropped by. Seeing real-life Merfolk, they suffered a total visual shock. Everything would have been fine if Latavesta hadn't accidentally let it slip by calling Van's son-in-law before leaving. Art's jealousy hit her brain instantly, like, excuse me, what wedding did I miss? Van denied everything like his life depended on it. But before he could clear his name, little Priora leaped out of the water, screamed hubby and dove back down. That god-tier team kill move made the atmosphere awkward as hell. To kill the drama, Van pulled Art onto a boat and headed to the middle of the lake for some private talk time. He swore on his life that things between him and Priora were pure and just a misunderstanding. Art was starting to feel the vibe, and they began enjoying the romantic space. But reality had other plans. Priora and her squad of besties swam over, and seeing Van soloing with a strange girl, her inner green-eyed monster awakened. Van reminded her they weren't even married, so chill with the jealousy, kid. Priora got salty and dove down, then the whole fish squad started shaking the boat like a spring rider at a playground, leaving Van and Art pale with fear. Later, Latavesta found out Van was dropping lines to Art and got dead serious, even though Van tried to explain he wasn't engaged to anyone. This almost father-in-law was tilted and proposed a competition. If the Akalu side wins, Van must officially get engaged to Priora. Van heard this nonsense deal and was about to call him delusional, but suddenly despawned in, screamed bet. Game on, and accepted the challenge. Before Van could even react, it was already a done deal. The squad of 500 thirsty for drama villagers enthusiastically supported this match, determined to force Van into competing. Van got to pick the first event. He had a brain blast and chose volleyball, a game that made everyone there look as confused as a confused goose, thinking it was another gigabrain invention from St. Van. But Dee and Panamera didn't even care about the rules, their eyes lit up just because they were hyped for the eye candy swimsuit reveal. Round 1 locked in Till and Big Sis Panamera against the fish duo Latavesta and Priora. As soon as the whistle blew, Van was wide-eyed because of the Merfolk's broken power level. They played like they were hacking, jumping high and smashing hard, completely outclassing the humans. Till got fed so many L's he almost went AFK, but Panamera immediately buffed him with some motivational template speeches. Regaining his form, Till and Panamera clawed back some points, bringing the score to a close gap. But no matter how hard they try hard, human strength couldn't match fish power. The result, Latavesta and his daughter dominated the first round. Since Van picked game 1, Latavesta Loki reminded him it was now his turn to choose. The crafty old man picked a relay swimming race immediately. Van started sweating bullets. This deal was basically throwing eggs at a rock, no different from making a monkey race of fish in water. The pressure was heavy on his spine. Losing this meant he was destined for a forced marriage as the fish family's son-in-law. Luckily, Dee volunteered to carry the team, and Kamsin also raised his hand for a slot. Finally, Van had his 2 strongest trump cards in hand. The race kicks off. Kamsin swims like he's got a jet engine strapped to his ass, struggling for dear life to keep up with Priora. Even though the fish girl swims fast as a rocket, Kamsin still manages to burst ahead just a bit before tagging Dee. When it's Dee's turn, things get extra. This guy pulls a butterfly stroke as powerful as a bulldozer, leaving the other team a whole mile behind to eat his bubbles. Van stands on the shore, unable to believe his eyes. Dee swims like an Olympic athlete, easy game. Latavesta suffers a total visual shock. He wonders if it's a glitch. How could the Akalu tribe, half human half fish born underwater, lose to these landlubbers? However, Latavesta still refuses to take the L because there's one final decider game. It's Van's turn to pick again. Taking notes from before, he uses magic to craft an ice machine and announces the final event, a shaved ice speed eating challenge. Art, feeling like she's been invisible with 0 contributions so far, volunteers immediately. Van also joins the fray to decide his own fate. The whole squad heads to the resort to start. At first, everyone is hyped and shovels in a few spoons, but they instantly get hit with a brain freeze that hurts down to the soul. But Van is determined not to sell his body to the fish family, and Art is determined to protect her future hubby, so the two use that as motivation and shovel ice like they've never eaten before. The result, Team Van clears the pile first, winning the whole thing. Even though Latavesta lost, he keeps his tough guy vibe and swims over to shake Van's hand. But his mouth still seals the deal by saying, "Son-in-law, remember to take care of Priora for daddy." Van is tilted. He won the match, yet this old man still talks like the rice is already cooked, trying his best to force the marriage. Meanwhile, everyone crowds around to congratulate Van on the W, laughing and vibing. Art stands there watching Van surrounded by friends, feeling pure admiration. She's never experienced a feeling like this. Memories start flooding back in the day. Art was like the black sheep of the family, ghosted by her parents because they thought she was trash, too shy to do anything useful. The turning point came when she learned puppet control magic. She thought her mom would praise her, but instead, she caught a slap to the face. Her mom said it was a forbidden dark art for nobles. From then on, Art was completely isolated. Art stands there watching Van surrounded by friends, feeling pure admiration. She's never experienced a feeling like this. Memories start flooding back in the day. Art was like the black sheep of the family, ghosted by her parents because they thought she was trash, too shy to do anything useful. The turning point came when she learned puppet control magic. She thought her mom would praise her, but instead, she caught a slap to the face. Her mom said it was a forbidden dark art for nobles. From then on, Art was completely isolated. The next morning, Van calls a village-wide meeting. He announces they need to build some ramps to expand the village. The good news is everyone gets tomorrow off, so tonight the whole village is throwing a giga-sized barbecue party. The villagers hear food and their eyes light up, making them grind work even harder. At the same time, Art shyly approaches to ask if she can sit and watch Van work to learn from him. Van says bet. While the village vibe is festive as hell, deep in the dark forest, Ortho's adventurer squad is being chased for their lives by something extremely dangerous, signaling that the next episode is gonna have some major drama. That's episode 5, remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Back at the village, the locals were totally clueless about the outside drama, busy eye cleansing by staring at the wall Van built in less than 2 weeks. The wall was giga-sized, tall and sturdy as heck. Everyone was simping over the main character's god-tier ability to crush deadlines. Panamera crawled over to Van, her face beyond shook, admitting she knew Van was talented but didn't expect him to be this outclassed. While talking, her assets were bouncing around, making Van steal a sneaky glance with a total brain-lag expression. To fix the awkward atmosphere, Van quickly pivoted the conversation to building more housing for the people about to move in. Van explained that merchants and adventurers would be swarming in soon, so they needed decent spots to crash. After hearing that, Panamera confessed she was feeling some major FOMO. Since she was a kid, she'd dreamed of being a real estate mogul with her own plot of land. Seeing Van's absolute power, she determined that in the next combat, she'd grind hard to earn some land instead of just chasing pocket change. While glancing around, Panamera's eyes caught some giga-sized machines on the wall. Van introduced them as ballistas long-range heat to make enemies log out before they even reached the gate. Van asked Kamsin to fire a demo shot. The arrow launched with thousands of newtons of force, powerful as a storm, leaving Panamera completely frozen. She couldn't believe the toy Van crafted was that terrifying. She was even more shook to find out Van had already crafted over 100 of them. Her shopping instincts kicked in, and she asked for the price to claim the order immediately. But Van was cold and said they weren't for sale, making the baddie feel mid for the second time. Not giving up, she baited him with a deal, trading the gear for a future favor. Van was down for it, saying he'd collect the debt later, which made Panamera hyped. She calculated that since the machine was heavy as heck, she'd need a truck, but she could handle the iron arrows herself. Then Kamsin flew in, nudging Panamera to take some of Van's custom-made arrows because they're built different. To flex, Kamsin pulled out a sword forged by Van and snapped Panamera's spare sword in half as easily as cutting noodles. Panamera's eyes nearly popped out. She asked what kind of space-age materials Van was using. But Van stayed chill and said it was just regular iron, but cracked enough to pierce through lizard armor, leaving her speechless. Finally, she locked in the deal for both the machines and the ammo. Just when things were vibing, the mood got trashed. Van turned around and saw Orthos' team running from the forest like their lives depended on it, with a giga-sized forest dragon chasing them down. Orthos screamed at Van to run and spread the word while his team acted as bait to buy time. Van felt a chill down his spine. Abandoning his homies was basically sending them to the lobby, but staying meant potentially putting the whole village into a dragon hotpot. Big Sis Panamera stepped up with gigaboss energy, telling Van to stay chill and let her handle it. She shouted for everyone to take cover behind the wall and signaled Ortho that she'd support them with the ballistas. Van turned to apologize to Art for making her witness the violence, then reassured her that everything was still under control. After that, Van asked Till to escort Art inside and called for D and the soldier squad to spawn in for backup. The second the dragon entered the crosshairs, the ballista squad started spitting fire. Arrows and bolts were flying everywhere, but this dragon was dodging skills like it had hacks, not a single hit landed. Van's heart skipped a beat. Their broken equipment was looking totally mid against this monster, and he started to smell a major cooked moment coming. Suddenly, Panamera popped her fire-type ulti, launching a giga-sized fire spear straight into the dragon's mouth. This move hit the jackpot, roasting the dragon's scales and leaving everyone wide-eyed. They didn't expect her to be a heavy-duty battle mage with aimbot-level precision. But this dragon was too tanky. It ate the hit and didn't even care, lunging forward again. Van called for everyone to go all in and fire at full power. This time, they got lucky and a few arrows pierced its wings. Van thought they were winning since it couldn't fly with broken wings, so he called for round 2. But the dragon read the play, swerving like a street racer and dodging every single shot, leaving Van beyond shook by its high IQ moves. Orthos' team finally crawled back to safety. Van was hyped, but he knew standing there as meat shields was a death sentence. Needing a combat opening to retreat, Panamera flexed again with a second fire spear that scorched the dragon's wing, slowing it down. Seizing the moment, Van shouted for the squad to dip back to the village without a second thought. But this dragon regained its composure as fast as an X flipping the script. It recovered its strength and leaped onto the wall, looking down at them like it owned the place. Van was terrified by its durability. It took a heavy fire spear and still stood tall like nothing ever happened. Right then, young Esparta strolled up, face cold as ice, and launched an earth-type move that dumped a mountain of boulders onto the dragon, locking its jaw in a split second. After dropping the move, Esparta just dusted off his hands and walked away perfectly chill, dropping a cold-blooded line to Van that the stunt bought them just enough time to crawl back to the village. Everyone started running like their lives depended on it, but Van knew better. Even with Esparta carrying the team, they were still seriously low on time. If they didn't stall a bit longer, that dragon would be breathing down their necks in no time. Van rushed back to the village gate and demanded Panamera pay back that favor she owed him right here, right now. His plan was crystal clear. When the dragon spawned in, the baddie would use her fire spear to pin it to the ground, and while it was stuck, the ballista squad would spray it until it was sent to the lobby. Panamera claimed the order and agreed. But reality had other plans. The dragon loomed over them while the ballista squad was still lagging and hadn't finished reloading. They needed more delay time. Right in the heat of the moment, D and his minions lunged out into the middle of nowhere, gripping the high-end heat Van crafted for them. The goal was to act as tanky units and hold the dragon back for a bit. The homies fought with pure brave energy, but this forest dragon was totally outclassing them, so Team D had to pull a U-turn and retreat to the village. But that short delay was exactly what Van needed. He flagged Panamera, and the baddie launched her fire spear ultimate immediately, pinning the dragon's head to the ground with aimbot precision. In that golden moment, the ballista squad was loaded and ready. The soldiers let it rain, and heavy arrows pierced straight into the dragon, dealing giga-sized damage. D crept closer to check the map and see if the dragon was officially dead. The dragon was lying perfectly still, then suddenly snapped one eye open, staring him down. D's reflexes were fast as lightning. He swung his sword and lopped off the dragon's head in a heartbeat. Only then did everyone finally believe the dragon had officially logged out of the server. The soldiers and villagers started celebrating and vibing like crazy. Little Art ran over to check on Van, yapping away. Panamera also crawled over to sim for Van, praising his big brain plan. At this point, she realized this whole village was basically just monsters in disguise. A normal village would have been deleted ages ago. If they ran into a dragon, they'd have zero chance of fighting back. Setting that aside, Panamera told Van he had to throw a ceremony to honor D and the squad as dragon slayers. They did the heavy lifting for the damage, and since D got the last hit kill, the MVP title belonged to him, no cap. Van nodded instantly and agreed. So, a ceremony went live right at the village square. All the locals gathered to cheer for the suicidal heroes. Panamera stepped up to honor each warrior, praising their durability and strength. Finally, she called out Van, saying that if it weren't for his gigabrain strategies, they'd all be pushing daisies by now. The whole village clapped so hard it sounded like thunder. Looking at Van, Panamera suddenly went deep thoughts mode, remembering her own rank grinding days since she was just an apprentice knight. She'd met all kinds of nepotism babies and worked for all sorts of bosses, but she'd never seen anyone as built different as Van. Panamera came from a family of elite knights in the capital with a long history of serving royalty. When they found out she had a gift for elemental magic, she was snatched up for training since she was a kid. After surviving countless brutal training sessions, she climbed to the rank of commander at 16. After winning battles left and right and racking up WS, 6 years later she was promoted to the nobility with the title of viscount. One day she met Lord Ferdinando, Art's dad, and heard the tea that he planned to marry off his youngest daughter to some lord in the middle of nowhere. That was the moment destiny linked her to Art's future. At first, Panamera was low-key panicking, worried Art would end up with some mid-loser husband and her life would be trashed. But after meeting Van, she realized she was dead wrong. Seeing Art's glow up, no longer the shy girl she used to be but someone who actually takes action, Panamera saw that Van was a total breath of fresh air, nothing like the stuck-up noble she'd dealt with her whole life. Having thought it all through, Panamera went big and made a giga-sized announcement to the public. As a viscountess of the empire, she wanted to form an equal alliance with Van. Van heard that and was frozen for 5 seconds. He didn't expect such a tasty deal to spawn in so suddenly. But his brain had a quick-fire moment, realizing this alliance was a win-win. Being ghosted by his old man and having zero connections, he knew he'd be brain-dead not to secure this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. After a few seconds of calculating, Van claimed the order and agreed. And just like that, the alliance between Van and Viscountess Panamera was officially locked in, promising a total blow-up future. That's the full content of episode 6. Remember to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode and stay tuned for new videos, besties. The next day, as the last forest dragon finally logged out of life, Old Man Espada met Van and started gaslighting him. Time to start the urban planning, boss. He was capping hard, claiming this tiny village has the potential to level up into a megacity that can host a casual 10,000 residents. But if you want to go big, you need a way to lure the chickens, attract people from everywhere to move in. Just as he said that, Till and Kamsin rushed in with the tea. Bell and Rango were back along with some traders from the Merry Merchant Guild. These guys were thirsty to buy the loot dropped from the forest dragon. Sniffing the bag, Van's eyes lit up like high beams. The kid thought to himself, this is officially the first brick for building that mega city. A moment later, the merchants crowded around to inspect the dragon's corpse. They were shook because they thought dragons were just myths, but this was 100% real deal hardware. After a thorough gear check, they locked in the price. This dragon is worth at least 100 platinum coins at the lowest. Van's brain crunched the numbers faster than a PC. 1 platinum coin is roughly 100 million yen. Quick math, this whole dragon is worth a casual 10 billion yen. Yet, when Van stepped out and asked, so, what's your final offer, those scammy merchants started lowballing him, quoting a friendly price of 60 platinum coins. Van heard that and his mood instantly tanked. Hello, didn't you guys just whisper 100 coins earlier? Salty as hell, Van went to snitch to Bell and Rango. When Van leaked the 60 platinum lowball offer, Bell and Rango straight up declared, something this premium has to sell for way more than that. The shady merchants stepped in to check them, using the whole we're in the same guild card to pressure them. They even started gating him, saying that since Van doesn't have any other customers, he'll have to sell it for cheap no matter what. But Bell and Rango said bet. They straight up declined, saying they respect Van too much to ever help scam him out of the dragon's real value. Getting ratioed to their faces, the shady merchants stormed off, leaving some curses behind. Van even heard them threatening to kick Bell and Rango out of the merchant guild. But these two chads stood their ground. Being kicked is worth it. because scamming the main character would make their consciences down bad. Seeing this, Van coolly dropped a line, "Then just start your own damn company." Bell and Rango screamed back, "Boss, you think starting a company is as easy as making a Facebook page? You need 3 things. First, pay the registration fee to the guild. Second, you need a physical brick and mortar spot. And third, you need a voucher or sponsorship from a titled noble." Van crunched the numbers. The first 2 are light work, but the noble sponsorship is the final boss level of difficult. After racking his brain, he realized the only person he's mutuals with is the baddie Panamera. So he trotted over to ask for the favor, and surprisingly, the queen locked in the deal and said okay immediately. Panamera explained this was basically a clout chase for her own territory by sponsoring a startup from zero, plus she gets the good vibes for helping 2 honest merchants. Van even teased, "Why don't you just take the credit for the dragon kill to look cooler?" However, the queen threw some shade. "What's the point of taking the credit? One investigation and they'll realize in a heartbeat that you did it." Panamera told Van he could just claim a title for himself. Being the son of a Marquis, Van could easily speedrun his way to the rank of Baron. Plus, if he announced he soloed the forest dragon himself, his clout would be even more premium. Van started getting shook because he's scared that being famous will bring too much drama. Panamera checked his mindset, view it as an honor. Van also realized if he hogged the spotlight for the dragon kill, Panamera might miss out on her own promotion request. Hearing the kid overthinking, Panamera went full big sis mode. "I don't need an 8-year-old kid worrying about me." Deal locked. She pushed all the dragon slaying credit onto Van. After that, Van ran back to flex to Bell and Rango that Panamera agreed to vouch for them. Hearing this, the 2 felt like a weight was lifted and were eternally grateful to the queen. To show their gratitude, they offered to pay Van 30 platinum coins for the dragon. Van was shook because this amount was even higher than the lowball price those shady merchants initially tried to force on him. Bell and Rango insisted this was the absolute least they could do, because without Van, they wouldn't have a glow-up opportunity like this. No rights to ship that giga-sized dragon corpse, no transport means no revenue, period. Right then, Panamera strolled over and leaked the whole script. They planned this all along, stealing the carriages to make Bell and Rango panic and crawl back to beg for mercy. But the big sis declared she wasn't letting that happen. She straight up let them borrow her own elite warhorse. This VIP ride was sturdy as a tank and fast as a Ferrari. With the queen backing them up, Bell and Rango didn't need to simp for that old guild anymore. Meanwhile, those 2 carriage-stealing merchants were driving away feeling like winners, totally convinced that Bell and Rango were about to cry and ask for forgiveness. But before they could even finish smirking, the thunderous sound of hooves echoed from behind. A horse zoomed past them at Godspeed. When they looked over, it was Panamera's warhorse, and Bell and Rango were the ones in the driver's seat. They didn't need to rely on that trash-tier old guild anymore. The 2 villains were frozen like glue, realizing their leverage had completely evaporated. Once the mess was cleared up, Panamera went to have an audience with the Emperor, King Dino, to submit the petition for Van's title. The big sis gave a casual presentation on how the little boss had been moving different and stacking up all these legendary achievements. Initially, King Dino's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he heard that Van was only 8 years old and already running an entire village. He also caught wind that the kid had a cracked passive buff and production magic. Even so, Dino was convinced that a kid this young would probably be a grief-tier lord instead of actually managing anything. Panamera calmly dropped a whole document listing every single one of Van's achievements, from modding the village and buffing the economy to HR management. As he listened, the doubt on King Dino's face started to fade. He began to realize that Van wasn't just some random troublemaker kid. The peak was when she pulled out a dragon fang as hard evidence, locking in the fact that Van was the mage who sent the forest dragon to the afterlife. Soloing a forest dragon for the kill is no joke. An 8-year-old kid carrying a trophy like that is a literal monster. Having been successfully gaslit into believing the hype, King Dino started simping for Van. He wanted to meet the kid immediately and tasked Panamera with setting up a meeting so he could personally check out this main character talent. After clearing her mission, Panamera stood in the middle of the empire and started clout chasing for Van, announcing he was the god-tier dragon slayer. This news spread at Godspeed. The commoners were frozen like glue, unable to believe it. Plenty of people already knew Van was the outcast son of a Marquis family, so the script of a trash-tier kid carrying such a legendary mission sounded totally sus to them. The baddie Panamera was low-key loving the chaos. The viral fever only strengthened the belief that Van would definitely secure a title. With fame this big, the royal family couldn't ghost him even if they wanted to. At the same time, ever since the queen left the village, the little boss Van hadn't been idle either. The guy was glued to his passion for urban planning and construction. He demolished and rebuilt the houses into a much cleaner layout, making the settlement look organized instead of being scattered like before. Roads were drawn in straight lines, and the spacing between buildings was pixel perfect. You could tell just by looking that this was a future megacity. The peak of the mountain is that Van also sprouted a series of giga-sized watchtowers along the defense perimeter. These towers basically hack the vision for the guards, helping them spot enemies from a distance so they have time to set up their defense strat and don't have to worry about getting ambushed. Clearly, this is a big brain move by Van for long-term safety and growth. Come lunchtime, the whole squad invited each other to climb to the top of the tower for a feast. Looking down from above, the expanding settlement was fully on display. Old man Espada looked at the big houses and the infrastructure Van created, clicking his tongue and saying that calling this place a village is just plain sad. From his perspective, it has already evolved into a town. The OG name at birth was Van Village, but after some talking it over, the brothers locked in a name change to Vantown just to look fancy. Van wasn't really a fan of the narcissistic move of naming a place after himself, but since his subordinates were high on the hype, he just let it slide. While chewing on his meal, Arte suddenly blushed and stammered out Van's name. The girl boldly shot her shot, asking him to just call her by her name from now on and drop all that formal honorific talk. Van felt happy that she was comfortable around him, so he nodded in a heartbeat. Right then, Kamsin pointed toward the main gate. A group of strangers was sousely lingering outside the walls. Van and old man Espada ran down to check the situation. Turns out these guests drifted here from a nearby town. The village elder explained their tragic situation. They couldn't carry the tax burden because they lacked young and fit players to do the farming. Van asked why they were short on staff. The old man told him their count had yoinked all the hotties and strong kids to work as labor for his own territory. The result is the village is now just senior citizens and little kids. With no one to work, they don't even have enough food, let alone enough to pay taxes. Van knew full well that messing with people from another territory is a fast track to political drama. Even so, the guy couldn't bring himself to just close his eyes and ignore it. His conscience wouldn't let him lock the gates and leave them out on the streets. After thinking it over, Van locked in the deal to take them all in and let them migrate to his town. The village elder was frozen frame when he heard there were 300 people, but Van still nodded. He even promised to sponsor every family with a pre-built house. The whole group of villagers was so moved they were literally shedding tears. Van also caught the tea that they were raising cattle. The second the word cow hit his ears, his economic brain started crunching numbers for a whole lineup of products like milk, cheese, and butter. This deal was a win-win for both sides. They got a safe place to stay and jobs, while he secured more resources and manpower. When night fell, Ortho's squad safely escorted the 300 evacuees back to Vantown. Along the way, the adventurers wouldn't stop gossiping about how extra and generous Van's vibe was. Upon arrival, Van had already prepped a giga-sized barbecue feast. Even on short notice, the little boss pulled out a massive grill loaded with meat for days. The new recruits were welcomed with open arms and ate until they were stuffed. Seeing their relieved faces, Van knew the effort was totally worth it. After the party died down, some people started stressing about what they'd eat tomorrow. Van comforted them instantly, saying there's no shortage of side quests. Job opportunities were everywhere, from construction and farming to future industries. The villagers were literally sobbing. Van had zero obligation to carry the whole squad on his back, yet he still opened his arms to welcome them. Going even harder, Van even brought out strawberry shortcakes for dessert, turning the debut into a massive celebration festival, marking the startup milestone of Vantown. Locking in the deal for episode 7 right here. Remember to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss next episode's drama, and check out the next video on your screen right now. Life in Vantown has been chilling lately. Those giga-sized construction projects are finally wrapped up, leaving the road smooth and the buildings looking top tier, a total glow up from how things used to be. Seeing the progress, Esparta connected the dots and decided it was officially time for young Van to get back to the books. He's convinced that Van has been AFK from his education for way too long. But Van is straight up not feeling it. After grinding so hard to build this town, he feels it's time to unwind, take a breather, and actually enjoy his youth. Making him study now? That's some capitalist exploitation energy right there. Just as things were getting tense, Ortho's squad spawned out of nowhere looking absolutely shook. They started spamming apologies to Van, confessing they accidentally tripped over a dungeon entrance right near the village. It's the one thing everyone was hoping wouldn't happen. Esparta immediately switched to serious mode. When a dungeon pops up, you have to report it to the higher-ups, meaning the royal capital, immediately. There's no way to gatekeep news this big, so he suggested sending a shipper on a high-speed run to deliver the intel. Van started overthinking the situation instantly. If word of a dungeon leaks, 500 thirsty adventurers from every server will swarm the town and wreck the vibe. His peaceful village would turn into a loud, chaotic mess. Even worse, if his old man finds out Van built such a cracked empire, he might just kick him to some other middle-of-nowhere spot. Ortho's team was feeling down bad for causing the drama, but Van played it cool. He told them to stop self-sabotaging, because once the cat's out of the bag, there's no hiding it. Knowing that Kuzala, the team's scout, was the one who actually unboxed the dungeon, Van appointed him as the designated runner to hit the royal capital. The squad agreed that Kuzala was the meta choice for the job, but they still wanted to tag along because squad goals. Van did a total 180 and ordered the rest of them to stay behind and camp the dungeon for more info, throwing in a sweetener of a legit salary paid in gold. The second they heard gold, the team flipped 180 degrees, happily waving goodbye as Kuzala headed out on his solo mission. Van even buffed Kuzala by gifting him a premium tier shortsword made of mithril that's super rare, expensive as hell metal that's nearly impossible to find. Receiving such a gigaflex item, Kuzala was feeling himself and proudly accepted the mission. The other guys finally woke up and were salty they weren't chosen, but Kuzala Gate kept his new toy hard, no trades allowed. With the deal locked in, everyone got to work, and Van wished the squad good luck. Kuzala galloped across the vast grasslands toward the royal capital, his eyes glued to his brand new mithril sword, low-key flexing in his head. Suddenly, he spotted a carriage flipped upside down. Surrounding the wreck was a group of unit-sized orcs, standing a massive 8 feet tall. Normally, Kuzala would have noped out of there instantly, but with that mithril god-tier gear in hand, he turned on combat mode and went full send. The sword sliced through orcs like butter. In a blink, he cleared the entire battlefield without even breaking a sweat. After the skirmish, a baddie timidly stepped out from her hiding spot. She introduced herself as Flamria. Seeing Kuzala's cracked sword skills, she thought he was some legendary high-level master. Kuzala played it humble, saying he's just a random adventurer passing through. Flamria spammed her thanks for the life-saving clutch. She then mentioned she just walked to the royal capital from there and prepared to say goodbye. Kuzala quickly intervened and invited her along, saying he was headed to the capital too and could give her a ride. Flamria shyly declined, saying saving her life was already enough and she didn't want to be extra trouble. But Kuzala insisted on the carpool until she agreed. Once they were on the move, Kuzala got curious and asked what her business was in the capital. Flamria started venting, telling him her dad used to be a baron but got deleted in a dispute. Their lands were snatched away, leaving her down bad, unemployed and homeless, so she was trekking to the capital to apply for a maid gig at some noble's house. Hearing this, Kuzala's brain connected the dots and realized she was basically a free agent now. He trolled the idea of being a maid, saying it's too much work, and suggested she just move to Vantown with him instead. The town's urban planning is top tier, there are plenty of jobs, and the security is cracked. Flamria found the offer vibey, moved by his Hirose's beauty energy. She thought about it for 3 seconds and locked in, she's following his lead. Meanwhile, back at the base, Van is busy running KPIs for the future. Now that the dungeon is public knowledge, people are going to start flooding in, and the town's chill vibes are officially at risk. To keep the adventurers in check, Van decides to build a security checkpoint right near the dungeon entrance to manage the traffic. He appoints Esparta as the station chief because the man is serious mode and actually responsible. Dee's squad gets drafted as the local civil guard to maintain order in the area. The checkpoint construction kicks off with massive energy and a god-tier pace. Looking at the progress, Van estimates the whole project will be wrapped up in about a month. Just then, Kuzala ships Flamria back to the village. Seeing a new face, Van immediately checks the VAR. Flamria politely recaps Kuzala's Hirose's beauty moment. Noticing the SUS glances between them, Van knows these two are shipping hard, but he decides to keep it low-key and doesn't expose them. Instead, he gives a friendly say hi and invites Flamria to join Vantown. The village needs a population buff anyway, the more, the merrier. Just as things are looking up, a unit of adventurers on horseback comes thundering into the village. Van panics, thinking a raid is spawning. Kuzala quickly calms him down, telling his boss to chill, they aren't here for beef, they're here to grind the dungeon. Van breathes a sigh of relief, knowing this is just the chaotic start of a noisy new chapter for the town. From a distance, these adventurers look intimidating max. They've got aggressive energy, loud mouths, and heavy tier armor, looking like a bunch of hired muscle. At first, they were acting out and being total noobs. But the second D checked them and put them in their place, they became as tame as puppies. They started following the local meta, speaking respectfully to the villagers. In reality, most of them were just shook to find out that the 8-year-old kid, Van, is actually the lord holding it down and running such a cracked town. Not long after, Ortho's team spawned back at the base. The second he saw Flamria, Ortho jumped in to interrogate Kuzala immediately. Kuzala casually told the story of how he looted a wife on the road. Ortho saw the lovey-dovey looks between them and connected the dots. Feeling gigasalty, Gato, Ortho started screaming in frustration, absolutely heated that his homie escaped the single life before him. Ignoring the low-tier drama, Van turned to Plural to get the intel on the dungeon area. Plural reported that things were looking sus, there wasn't a single mob spawning near the entrance. Usually, dungeon perimeters are crawling with monsters, making it mission impossible to build anything permanent. Adventurers usually just camp in tiny tents. But Van is built different, he's got that god-tier ability to manifest buildings in a flash. Hearing Plural's yapping, Van knew she was about to bait him into more work. Right on cue, she tried to gaslight him into building infrastructure around the dungeon. Van played the good kid card, claiming he had a strict curfew and that Esparta would delete him if he stayed out late. Plural immediately offered to carry him, promising to protect him and that the construction would be blink and you miss it fast. In reality, Van was just being lazy maxing, he only wanted to build his town, not get Dusty out at some dungeon. To ghost the request, he listed a bunch of delusional demands, thinking Plural would nope out. Instead, she locked in the deal instantly, agreeing to every single term without flinching, and casually announced, "We start tomorrow, boss." Van stood there shook for 5 seconds, realizing his plan to dodge work had officially failed the vibe check. The next day, Van resigned to his fate and hopped on the carriage. The road was bumpy as hell, giving Kamsun motion sickness energy. Suddenly, a unit-sized troll spawned in to block their path. The adventurers synced up their play and deleted the troll in a heartbeat. After the win, they started celebrating like they just hit a jackpot. Van had a giga headache from the noise, but seeing Till and Art vibing so hard made him feel slightly better. A bit further down, Van poked his head out and told the driver to slam the brakes. Right in front of them was a deep-ass pit, bridged by 2 flimsy, thin-tier logs. The adventurers, being total high-risk players, didn't care about safety and prepared to full-send it across. But Van said hard pass, doing business that unoptimized is a one-way ticket to logging out permanently. Deciding to restore order, Van made the muscle-brain dudes kneel and do a self-audit for their lack of common sense. Those logs were trashed here, one step and they'd snap instantly. Dep. Van cast his building spell and manifested a top-tier, sturdy bridge. Now everyone could cross safely without worrying about falling off the map. Once they arrived, Van started urban planning maxing. Knowing the adventurers needed a base of operations, he first built a giga-sized gate to gatekeep the monsters from escaping. Next, he manifested a 5-star luxury hotel, fully equipped for the brothers to chill after a long day of grinding. The hotel was so cracked and fancy that the adventurers were simping for it, showering him with W ratings. As the sun started setting, Van suddenly remembered his curfew. Big yikes, if he showed up late, Esparta would definitely start lecture maxing again. Before ghosting the scene, he appointed Ortho as the hotel manager to gatekeep the facility and keep things running smoothly. Just as he was about to pull a U-turn and head back, Art's eagle eyes caught something sus. She pointed out a weird sticking out of the ground. They dug it up and realized they just hit the jackpot, it was raw mithril. Van showered Art with W ratings, praising her cracked observational skills. The squad didn't respawn back at the village until dead of night. Standing right at the gate like a final boss was Esparta, wearing a smile that was straight-up nightmare fuel. Van felt the instant regret of breaking curfew. Panicked, he spammed for help from the homies, but everyone ghosted him, hiding in the corner because they fear Esparta more than a high-level monster. Only Ortho was brave maxing enough to step up and explain that it wasn't Van's fault. But Esparta just dropped a lethal glare, telling him to shut up and vibe check himself out of there. Without saying a word, Esparta yanked Van by the collar and dragged him back into the village, leaving the rest of the squad frozen like glue in the icy atmosphere. Episode 8 officially wraps up here. Don't forget to subscribe to catch the drama in the next episode, y'all. Van is out here flexing some major magic art, and the couple goals vibes with Art are hitting a fever pitch. Do your boy a favor, smash that like button and hit subscribe to support the channel. Now, grab your gear and let's dive straight into the drama. The next day, Van and Art are out on the town, basically radiating couple sweetness everywhere they go. Van clocks that Art has been camping out in this village for a minute, so he asks if she's planning to make it her permanent home. When Art starts acting all shy, Van thinks she's overthinking the engagement, so he tells her to yeet those social expectations out the window and just follow her heart. Art blushes and drops the hammer. "I want to get engaged to you, you idiot." Van is internally screaming with joy, but he keeps his cool guy mask on lock. A bit later, Bell and Rango return from the capital, flexing their successful startup trading company and giving all the credit to Boss Van's buffs. They transfer over the 30 platinum coins they owed him like total pros. Van takes the bag and immediately passes the secret fund to Till for safekeeping. Holding that much generational wealth, Till hits a total system freeze. It's the first time she's ever touched that much cold, hard cash. Commune updates the group that Big Sis Panamera is currently stuck grinding KPIs over in Earl Ferdinando's territory. But Bell and Rango heard some tea. She'd rather form an alliance with Van than work under that other guy, meaning she's going to be lurking around here for the long haul. Van originally thought she was moving into the village, but the crew clarifies she was just granted land right next door. Van does some quick math and realizes, with Panamera's personality, it's only a matter of time before she moves in for good. Finally, Bell and Rango unbox a premium gift from the capital for Van. When the wooden crate opens, it transforms into a high-spec mechanical crossbow that leaves Van jaw-dropped. This is the latest core tech, a semi-auto beast that can spray 10 bolts in a row. They know Van's galaxy brain will eventually mod this into some super-tier artillery. Van is hyped, already thinking of all the ways he can use this new toy. After checking it out, Van uses his cube to copy-paste a duplicate. But when he tests it, he's totally bummed because the fake is glitchy and doesn't run as smooth as the authentic version. Seeing this, Art has an epiphany. Even a pro like Van can flop, he's not a literal god after all. Van just laughs off the embarrassment, admitting that besides his crafting magic, he's basically trash at everything else. Art is shook because she really thought Van was a perfect male lead who excelled at everything. Van quickly shifts gears and asks about Art's own magic talent. She gets all insecure and starts stuttering, but Till steps in to save her, telling her she doesn't have to talk if she doesn't want to because Van never forces anyone. Art shakes her head and finally spills the tea. She has a talent for puppet manipulation magic. Van gets it instantly. The type of magic is usually cancelled and looked down upon by society, which is why she's been hiding it. Since he's never seen it in the wild, Van begs Art to show off a few moves. This magic style is all about that string-pulling energy. To get the hype train moving, Van crafts a custom puppet from a block for Art to show off her skills. Art takes control, and the puppet starts moving so fluidly it looks like it's actually alive. Van is absolutely losing it with joy, giving Art a massive hug because he can smell the out-tier potential she's packing. Till senses a big brain move too, suggesting they set up a puppet lives house for the villagers. She even tells Van to use that mithril or Art found the other day to mod a high-spec, premium puppet for her. Even with the squad backing her, Art is still low-key scared. She tries to make excuses, saying her magic isn't meant for entertaining people. Van goes into gentle mentor mode, admitting he used to overthink things just like her. He tells her how his old man called him trash because of his crafting magic, but that same magic is exactly what's carrying the team and bringing smiles to the whole village now. Art is officially getting hit with that talk no jutsu clarity. Up until now, she'd been gaslighting herself into thinking she was useless. But seeing a top 1 server idol like Van struggle and still make it to the top helps her pull a total U-turn. She tells herself that if Van could yeet his insecurities out the window, there's no reason she can't do the same. For the first time, a spark of real confidence starts to catch fire in her heart. That night, the whole village gathers at the square, wondering what the drama is about. Van hops on the mic to announce Art's debut puppet performance. A life-sized puppet is wheeled out, and Art takes a deep breath, channeling her mana to make it bow. The crowd immediately clocks the puppet manipulation magic, and a few people start yapping about the old scandals where rebels used this magic to attack the royals. The vibe starts to get a little shaky with all the whispering. Overhearing the gossip, Art starts to feel the pressure. Terrified the village is about to cancel her, Van picks up on her system freeze right away. Feeling like hundreds of eyes are waiting to throw shade, she almost decides to ghost the stage and run. But she takes a breath, locks in her courage, and starts pulling the strings with insane precision. The puppet becomes a literal blur of motion, moving so gracefully the audience hits a system shock. What used to be a brainless object is now dancing so beautifully it looks like it's been possessed by a professional spirit. Van is mesmerized, admitting that this puppet magic is truly illusory. The power to breathe life into inanimate objects is the real deal. As the dance ends, Art slowly turns around, bracing herself to get ratioed for using forbidden magic. But the script flips, the villagers erupt into a standing ovation, with some even screaming for an encore. Van steps up to give her props, and her lifelong fear just evaporates on the spot. Overcome with emotion, Art dives into Van's arms, sobbing and thanking him. She whispers that thanks to his guidance, she finally realized this power was always a part of her. The next day, Big Sis Panamera returns from a high-stakes meeting at the palace. The second she starts chatting, she clocks a massive change. Art has completely leveled up, radiating that main character confidence. It's obvious Van provided a legendary mental buff that helped her glow up. Panamera's curious, asking Van what kind of cheat code he used. Van just keeps it humble, saying Art always had the talent, she just lacked the confidence. He just helped her realize her magic is actually broken. Panamera gives that answer a solid 10 out of 10. However, the vibe shifts fast when Panamera remembers the main mission. She barks at Van to get on his knees immediately because the king is in the building. Van doesn't miss a beat and hits the deck. He finally gets a face-to-face with Dino, the king of Scuderia, and the prime minister, Aperta. King Dino officially closes the deal, naming Van a baron and welcoming him into the nobility. The big boss leaves him with a reminder: stay loyal and keep doing it for the clout of the country. Besides the promotion, Dino's been hearing some rumors. He knows Van stumbled onto a dungeon nearby and announces he's sending a squad to verify later. But that's not all. He heard the tea about Van's team soloing a wood dragon. It sounds so unreal that the king personally hauled tail down here just to see if the receipts were real. The king demands a full, step-by-step report. Van nods but gives a disclaimer first. The story sounds like a sci-fi novel, so he begs the boss to turn off his logic and listen with an open mind so he doesn't think he's just capping. Dino's like, okay, bet, show me what you got, and gives him the green light. Van starts the presentation, showing off the village's offensive and defensive weapon systems. Prime Minister Aperta is low-key nitpicking the ballista setup, judging that while they're fire for long range, they're too clunky for daily combat. Van's thinking, you're such a noob, and decides to give them a live demonstration to shut down the shade. He calls over his boy Kamshin to let one rip. Boom! The destructive power is so massive it has everyone shaking. King Dino's jaw literally hits the floor. He had no idea a weapon could be this cracked in terms of raw damage. But the part that really has Dino hitting a system freeze is finding out Van is the solo dev. He designed and produced all this gear from A to Z. The king literally can't process it. It sounds like a total dirty buff storyline. Van realizes the script is getting too unreal, so he switches to explaining the city walls. Aperta tries to crunch the numbers, guessing it took a decade to build, only for Van to drop a truth bomb. Actually, we finished the whole thing in under 4 months. Both the king and the prime minister are officially confused, speechless and completely shook. Next up, Van takes the 2 big bosses on a VIP tour around the village. Everywhere they go, the villagers are hype AF, greeting Van with pure energy. Dino clocks it immediately. Van's clout and reputation with the locals are officially hitting the ceiling. But the king hits another culture shock when they reach the river and see it packed with Palu, an incredibly rare species that's gathering here like it's a music festival, truly unreal. To show off the workflow, Esparta flexes some earth magic to mold the foundation of a wall, and then Van follows up with his production magic to instantly transform it into a high durability, rock-solid structure. After watching this magical makeover, Dino and Aperta are just standing there in a total system freeze. A bit later, Latesta catches wind that the king is in town and hauls tail over to pay his respects and do some low-key brown-nosing. To show off his friendship, the old man presents a chunk of orichalcum ore as a gift. Everyone's jaw drops because this is literal god-tier metal. If you forge a sword out of this, the market value hits hundreds of platinum coins easily. Van's crafting itch kicks in, and he uses his magic to forge a sword out of it in the blink of an eye. But as soon as it's finished, he gets scared and quickly hides the finished loot behind his back. He's not trying to let the king know he's running a forging hack that makes crafting legendary gear look like child's play. Big Sis Panamera catches him in the act and gives him a look, telling him to just be real for once. Van decides to eat his pride and confesses everything. Surprisingly, the king loves the honesty and wants to close the deal on the sword at any price. But Van misses the money. Instead, he asks for a permanent residency favor, making Dino promise to never server transfer or exile him to another territory. Dino gets where he's coming from, but he thinks burying a galaxy brain like Van in this corner of the map is a waste of talent. He offers a compromise. Would Van be down to work remote and take on special tasks for the crown? Van nods and closes the deal. Touched by Van's dedication to his village, the king approves the request on the spot. Van is over the moon. He's one step closer to the chill life he's been grinding for. A little later, Dino mentions he's too busy and can't stay away from the capital for long. But just as he's about to pack up and head out, boom, the villagers start screaming. A red alert goes out. There's a dragon closing in on the village. Van immediately goes into commander mode, shouting for the adventurers to gear up and man the defenses right here, right now. Panamera rolls up her sleeves and asks for a slot on the raid team, which doubles Van's confidence. He's sure they're about to clear this map without a scratch. The dragon lands, circling the team like a scene straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. The whole squad is staring up at the sky, their brains working overtime to figure out what the hell they should do next. And that is the explosive ending of episode 9. Don't forget to subscribe so you can catch the next part and see the latest videos. Peace out. Looking closer, the squad realizes this wyvern isn't just out for a casual Sunday flight. There's actually a mage sitting on its back, drifting it through the sky. Aperta breaks down the situation instantly. Wyverns are social creatures, they always move with the squad. A lone wolf flying like this is a major red flag. There's definitely a mega-sized conspiracy brewing behind the scenes that the team hasn't checked the VAR on yet. Dino's brain starts working overtime, and he immediately points the finger at the kingdom of Yelanetta. That dirty playstyle, that's 100% them. Van's blood starts boiling. He wants to send that wyvern to the permanent lobby right here, right now. But he knows his limits. His ballista's range just isn't hitting. The monster is flying at a level that's basically out of reach, out of touch. After crunching the numbers, Van settles on the final plan: bring out the prototype and use it while it's hot. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, the 8th prince of Yelanetta, Animog, is looking as salty as a bag of chips. His dad sent him to conquer some nowhere village, and he'd honestly rather be outstanding his favorite idols. A knight tries to give him a reality check. Boss, the king chose you because this mission is high stakes. Our kingdom and Scuderia have had beef since the beginning of time. It's time to settle the score once and for all. But Animog is just letting it go in one ear and out the other. He thinks a remote village like this is a low-diff fight. He'll out-tier them in a heartbeat. To him, the game is so easy it's not even worth using 100% of his power. He's planning to wrap this up in a single frame. A bit later, the massive army arrives at Van's gates and everyone hits a 5-second system freeze. Nobody expected a rural village to have a Godzilla-sized wall like this. Animog glares at the wall and drops a total noob take. It's fake. It's all just an illusion to scare us. He orders the battering rams to start smashing. They smash until they're exhausted, but the wall just stands there, barely a scratch. Animog is officially embarrassed and speechless. Right on cue, Van appears on top of the wall, looking down. He introduces himself as the Lord of the Manor and asks point blank, "What brings you guys to my neck of the woods?" Animog looks up, his face turning pale. He never expected the lord of this land to be a kid who's barely hit puberty. Swallowing his shock, he snaps, "How did you guys build a wall this broken in a literal wasteland?" Van hits him with the most innocent response ever. "Oh, me and the villagers just built it together with some sweat, tears, and the power of friendship, bro." Animog isn't buying a single word of that power of friendship talk, he's convinced Van is just trolling him. Absolutely tilted, he orders his knight to signal the wyvern-riding mage to start an air raid on the village. The knight is low-key scared, timidly suggesting, "Boss, if we ambush them now and they counter-damage us, we're cooked." Animog just scoffs, "Please, this budget village doesn't have the gear to bring down my wyvern." Up on the wall, Van syncs up with Panamera. Big Sis launches a projectile that soars even higher than the dragon, and then boom! The shell splits into dozens of tiny fragments, raining down like a lethal shower and shredding the dragon in seconds. When the smoke clears, the monster has vanished without a trace. Van explains the hot gear they just used is called the Shuriken Lightweight, but the damage is peak tier. For a first-time field test, it performed even better than expected. Aperta's jaw hits the floor looking at the dragon's remains. A purely physical weapon with 0 elemental magic buffs doing damage equivalent to a max-level spell? That's insane. Right then, Dino steps out and looks down at Animog. The prince is in total system shock. Wait, what? Why is the king of Scuderia chilling in this middle-of-nowhere village? Realizing he's completely out-tiered, Animog has no choice but to call for a retreat. This match was a total L. Meanwhile, Dino starts overthinking about Van's dad, that Marquis who kicked Van out just because the kid couldn't use elemental magic. That old man was literally playing with a blindfold on, having no clue his son was this cracked. Dino mutters to himself, "When I get home, I'm dumping more funding into magic research. Human knowledge is still looking pretty noob right now." Animog gets hauled off to the dungeon. At first, he tries to act tough and refuses to talk. But Panamera just walks in and roasts him for a few minutes, and he spills everything. Turns out, Yelanetta has been eyeing the remote villages of the Marquis region for a long time. The plan was to slow-roll the invasion, starting with small, easy-diff targets like this village to use as a base. Panamera hears this and feels second-hand embarrassment for the guy. A master plan that didn't even make it past the front gate, yikes. Aperta leans in with a final question, "Are you guys ambushing anywhere else?" Animog confesses, "Yeah, we're moving troops to sneak attack the fortress city of Skudit." The room goes pale. This world-ending news is immediately reported to Dino. Aperta doesn't hesitate, "We have to hit the capital, grab the army, and save Skudit before it's too late." Dino is 100% down, but he sets one condition, Van has to come with us. Van goes quiet. Normally, he'd say yes without a second thought. He thanks Dino for the trust but asks for a pass. The village is still in the startup phase, and he can't bear to leave it behind. Dino and the squad try to convince him, "Your village is armed to the teeth, kid, it can handle itself." Van gets the point, but he still says no, "The weapons are fire, sure, but my vision for this place is way bigger. We've only finished 1/10 of the roadmap, there's still a mountain of work to do." Panamera can't help but laugh at Van's total workaholic energy. She's hyped to see the village's final form, especially since it's already peak tier as it is. Still, she drops some cold hard logic to convince him, when the nation is in a crisis, the nobility has to stand together. You can't let personal projects distract you from the big picture. Van crunches the numbers and realizes she's right. He agrees to join the raid, but with one condition, "I'm bringing my own squad." Dino closes the deal instantly. Van gathers the team for a quick briefing, "We're heading out to save the neighboring city, departure is imminent." Esparta stays behind to act as the acting CEO, while D, Kamzen and the main crew follow Van. Right before they move out, Orthos' team asks to be Van's personal bodyguards. Van is touched and tells them to recruit more adventurers to tag along, offering a salary of 5 gold per person. The squad is shook, that's a massive overpay. But Van keeps it real, "If you're putting your life on the line for me, that's just the fair market value." Panamera announces she's heading back to report to Earl Ferdinando first, then she'll bring reinforcements to Skudit. She asks Van what heavy artillery he's packing. Van realizes his ballistas are currently disassembled and too clunky to transport. Just as he's hitting a lag spike on ideas, Art speaks up, "I'll use my puppets to act as your mobile artillery unit." Before the march, Van gathers everyone for one last talk, "Listen up, don't get scared. We aren't going to the front lines. The only objective, everyone comes home alive. Once we clear this mission, we're having a massive barbecue back at the village." Meanwhile, Van's dad, Jalpa, just got the news that Skudit is being ambushed. He orders his butler to call for backup from the neighboring lords. The butler suggests, young Master Van's village is nearby, and they seem to have some serious firepower. Jalpa shuts him down instantly, that trash village can barely take care of itself. Van is a failure who can't even use elemental magic, calling him is just a waste of breath. A little later, when the Marquis arrives at Skudit's south gate, he hits a total system freeze. The impenetrable walls have been absolutely shredded by Yelanetta's wyverns. Jalpa sees the state of the server and panics, "Retreat. Everyone out." The commander reports that most of the soldiers have already vanished. Just as the commander closes his eyes and waits for a game over, the enemy suddenly pulls a U-turn and retreats. He's left totally confused. The answer was waiting at the west gate. One of Art's puppets makes a single pro move, tearing through the entire wyvern swarm simultaneously. Art is gaming from a safe distance, totally protected while she remote controls the chaos. Everyone is jaw-dropped, even Art herself hasn't fully realized that she's currently wielding some of the most unreal power on the entire server. Van scans the battlefield and decides to run a feint and distract play to give the wounded soldiers a window to retreat. The plan works like a charm. Yelenetta's troops rush in, but Van's squad coordinates perfectly, sending them to the permanent lobby in record time. Suddenly, a rogue wyvern breaks formation and charges straight for Van. Art hits a god-tier reflex, maneuvering her puppet to intercept the hit in a split second. Once Van sees the wounded are safely out, he calls for a tactical retreat. Ortho tries to stop him. "Boss, we're winning. If we push now, we can clear the whole map." Van just shakes his head. A victory where people die is meaningless. "If I lose any of you, this win is straight up trash." Marquis, Jalpa and the lucky survivors regroup. A soldier asks, "What's the move, boss?" Jalpa declares, "Gather the troops, we're taking Skewed back." He's talking tough, but internally, he's still lagging. How are we even alive right now? That was way too lucky. Right then, Mercia, Jalpa's other son, rides up to apologize for being late to the party. Dino spawns in next, and Jalpa and Mercia immediately hit the deck to pay respects. Dino asks for a status report, and Jalpa gets emotional. "Skewed is cooked, Your Majesty." He starts explaining the chaos, but Aperta senses a glitch in the story. "If it's that bad, how did your troops pull off such a smooth retreat?" Jalpa shrugs. "The dragons just left, I've got zero explanation for it." Dino's brain hits that eureka moment instantly. It was Van. He drops a massive lore bomb on Jalpa and Mercia. Van didn't just survive, he turned a wasteland village into a broken fortress, soloed a dragon, and got officially knighted. And he did it all while he's still technically a noob in terms of age. Jalpa hits a total system freeze, unable to believe his ears, but he can't even use elemental magic? Dino notices Mercia clenching his fists. He assumes the older brother is depressed or salty because his trash brother outleveled him. But then he looks closer. Mercia's face is crumpled and he's actually tearing up. It's not jealousy, it's pure, unadulterated pride for his little brother. That night, Van's team gathers around the campfire. Van tells them, "We've done our duty as nobles, but we're still allies with Skewed. We've gotta support them till the end." Art stares into the fire and confesses, "This was my first time seeing real war. It was terrifying. I never want to do that again." Van, feeling for his future wife, comes up with a cheat code. "I'll build catapults and send them to the front lines. That way, nobody on our team has to be in the line of fire, you won't have to worry." Van goes into workaholic mode, using his production magic to forge the catapults right there. But a physical limitation appears. The catapults are absolute units, too big to transport on the current map. The final verdict, they have to head to the actual battlefield to assemble the gear on site. And that's the end of episode 10. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next drop. Go watch the next video right now. Van talked big last night, but this morning he faces a regret combo shipping hot goods into a war zone. How will the check with his toxic dad and the peak standoff with the king go? Join the drama of episode 11 now. Next morning, Van officially regrets his overenthusiasm last night. Now he must personally ship new weapons into the war zone, feeling depressed just thinking about it. While subordinates are confident new gear will outplay rivals, Van only stands in a corner complaining non-stop. The crew soon approaches the city near Skewed. Van sees everything looks chill, but the soldiers are insanely many. D explains that after the painful loss at Skewed, soldiers use this place as a base to heal and rebuild forces. Just then, a group of knights blocks Van, and the leader is none other than his dad, Jalpa. He looks at Van with disdain, asking, "Heard you hunted a dragon and became a baron with land now?" Van casually admits it was just a normal forest dragon, but the name forest dragon makes the knights with Jalpa freeze in fear. Jalpa cannot believe it, asking how Van did it, since even an elemental mage genius like him cannot solo that monster. Van drops a line that silences his dad. "That is just a skill issue, Dad." Then, he reveals he used a massive ballista to send the dragon to its next life. Jalpa is furious because he refuses to believe it. Van knows his dad is a weirdo, so he does not bother arguing more. During the silence, Mira appears, reporting the king is here to see Van's new weapons. Seeing Mommy Mira, Van invites his dad to watch the weapon demo. Mira helps, telling Jalpa to watch Van flex his goods for free. Mira talks business with Van, while Jalpa looks with disgust and disbelief. Then, the three go to meet the king. Van is impressed because the king's guards look badass. Mira takes the chance to talk trash, saying Van could slap these guards with his new equipment, making the soldiers' blood boil. Van is red from embarrassment, while Mira laughs and leads him to the king. A meeting with nobles is discussing reclaiming Skewed. Van notices Art's dad, Count Ferdinando, is there, making him confused on how to even say hello. The king asks Aperta if anything is noted, so he rambles about the rival kingdom using flying dragons and black balls to blow everything away in a day. Van realizes these people do not even know what a bomb is, so there is no way to resist. The king is depressed, and Jalpa is grieving since losing many soldiers under the bomb rain. Asked about tactics, Van answers simply, just shoot down the flying dragons before they drop bombs, then winning is easy as cake. The nobles mock him, telling Van to go play with toys in kindergarten. But the king puts faith in him, requiring Van to go to the front line to lead the campaign. Van flatly refuses, shocking the assembly. No one believes a kid dares talk back to the king like that. Van casually says, I am not the fighter type, I am a support type, and importantly I fear pain so I am not going anywhere. Nobles call Van selfish, cowardly, even roasting Jalpa for failing to teach his son. Jalpa is red with rage, scolding Van for being rude to the king. Van claps back, none of you understand how much it sucks to protect a tiny village with zero help. The king stops them and tells Van to continue. So he tells the journey of protecting his small village, though stronger now, if enemies attack, they could easily fade to black. A noble asks, who is bored enough to attack that middle of nowhere village? Aperta explains the enemy is serious about invading so they will skip no place. Van confirms he wants to protect the village he and his friends built so he cannot get injured here. Count Ferdinando understands but wonders if Van has the level to defend the village. Van confirms firmly yes, making the nobles freeze again. Van suggests, I will provide ballistas and catapults to the army, in exchange let me go back to my village and stay low. The king closes the deal immediately. Jalpa mocks, starting now will take forever. Van casually leads the group out for a live demo. He creates weapons in a flash making nobles freeze for 5 seconds. Jalpa stays toxic, calling it junk and leaving to gather troops. Van explains the catapult shoots shurikens to drop flying dragons. The king trusts him and adjourns the meeting. Just then, Till leads Art to pick up Van. Art freezes seeing her dad due to past trauma of being rejected. The dad coldly says the house is fine and leaves quickly for military business, without even looking at his daughter once. Art is depressed. Van asks Till to lead her back to rest. That night, Van and friends set the final tactic. Calm leads artillery, D and Ortho take the protection deal. Mira drops a fire line, it is time for the final battle, everyone. Mommy Mira declares, the era of elemental mages is officially cooked, now is the era of technology. She believes Van can solo the map, slapping the enemy army with his unique weapons. Next morning, war drums roll, the army charges like battle gods. Van stays true to support, staying low in the back to observe and coordinate the match. The enemy general sees Scuderia army swarming and scoffs, thinking our army intends to wear down the defense instead of breaking the gate. He is overconfident, ordering archers to load damage, intending to send our army to a server reset early. But Van has a play ready to check. D orders the team to pull out shields. The arrow rain falls but shields stay firm without a scratch, making the enemy general freeze for 5 seconds. Actually these are just handmade wood from Van's house, not supernatural material. The enemy general, the lost brother of Zoro, sends mages to break shields. Continuous attacks make D's team feel weak, but he tells them to tank, backup is coming. Right then, an intense fireball hits the city gate directly. Fake Zoro starts panicking seeing archmages gather at the gate. It turns out the previous army was just bait to leave the gate empty and undefended. Under Jalpa and Ferdinando, a massive magic combo blows the gate away, clearing the path for the army to swarm in. Combat erupts intensely inside the city. Elite enemy soldiers give our knights a hard time. Just then, Mommy Mira slides in to clear the way, making enemy soldiers fade to black in a heartbeat, letting D's team surge up. Even the dad Jalpa faces trouble but has Ortho and the squad save him in time. Jalpa completely freezes realizing these Mohawk battle gods are the sun's people he once shunned. Seeing the situation too intense, the enemy general unleashes the Wyvern Flying Dragon Corps. Van was just waiting, ordering K to put the catapults to work. Spheres full of sharp shurikens are shot into the sky and explode, creating a rain of hidden weapons sending the Dragon Corps to their next life in bulk. The team has no time to celebrate as one dragon loaded hacks and survived. It intends to go butcher mode but Ortho and Kasala rush to pin it down. Though Van's weapons cannot pierce its thick hide, the goal is for the ballista squad to finish it. This dragon is tanky as hell, shot like a porcupine but still refusing to die, forcing Mommy Mira to act with a knockoff hollow purple version and decapitated for a major KS. The Flying Dragon Corps is officially gone. Mira declares the hardest part of the battle is over. The dads Jalpa and Ferdinando freeze for a few seconds because they cannot believe Van's troops are so overpowered. The enemy general sees the situation is bad and tries to escape quickly, but Ortho and Kasala are already waiting to check him on the spot. The war ends, the dad Jalpa quietly leaves. When Mira asks why he won't meet his son, he says he was wrong to underestimate Van so he has no face to see him. Over here, Van is having a celebration party very chill. D praises Van highly, but he stays humble. I just stood in the back giving orders, the credit belongs to the brothers. Right then, Ortho drags the enemy general over. Meeting Mommy Mira preparing for torture mode makes him so scared he wets his pants. He confesses the whole plan to attack 3 points, Van's village, Skudit, and especially Ferdinando's territory, Art's hometown. This news makes Art deeply depressed with worry for her family, but that is also when this video ends. A painful ending for Art and the start of a major new drama. Do not forget to like and subscribe to not miss the next fire technology flexes by everyone. In episode 12, Art looks Van dead in the eye and demands to handle this mission solo. Van tries to insist on tagging along, but Art shuts him down instantly, explaining she can't just keep leaning on his help for every little thing. To top it off, she drops the ultimate truth bomb: this is family business, and she needs to check the vibes and settle it herself to keep things legitimate. Van is left completely stunned because he's never seen her this intense or decisive. After doing some quick mental math, Van finally clocks the situation. At the end of the day, he's just a small-town boss from a remote village. If the massive Ferdinand district ended up being bailed out by a tiny settlement like his, the family's reputation would be deleted. The higher-ups would probably even strip them of their land for causing such a massive embarrassment to the nobility. With that in mind, Van asks to go along as a bodyguard just to keep Art safe, and she gives him the green light. Seeing this, Ortho's crew jumps in, offering their protection because they have so much respect for Van. Plus, since they're just adventurers, their involvement wouldn't trigger any major political drama. Van agrees and gives them strict orders to guard Art with their lives. The moment they arrive, Art is hit with a cold-blooded sight: dragons are straight-up carpet-bombing the city into rubble. Art screams and tries to charge in, desperate to find her mother, but Ortho is quick enough to hold her back before she does something reckless. Ortho points out that if they jump into the fray right now, they still have a chance to flip the script. However, Art insists the adventure team cannot officially take the lead. She explains that someone from the Ferdinand family has to be the one to clap the Yelanetta kingdom's forces to ensure their honor stays intact. Meanwhile, Lady Sharon is standing by the window with her daughter, the princess. Watching the Yelanetta forces tear the country apart below, she tells her daughter not to worry. She's already planning to stage a grand log-out ceremony for herself, wanting to go out in a way that preserves a heroic image for future generations. She wants the world to believe the great princess passed away peacefully with zero regrets. Hearing her mother talk deep like this, the princess can only stare back, her face completely pale with terror. That haunting look in her eyes suddenly reminds Sharon of Art. At this moment, the Yelanetta army is gearing up to storm the Ferdinand district, looking absolutely hyped and convinced they're about to secure a total victory. But right before they can make their move, a war dragon suddenly gets clapped and drops dead right in front of them, leaving the entire squad completely shook and frozen in place. While the Yelanetta troops are standing there catching second-hand embarrassment trying to process what just happened, a silver-armored knight suddenly appears, gliding through the battlefield like a god and slapping those war dragons out of the sky in a heartbeat. In reality, this is actually a puppet that Art is controlling from a distance using her high-level magic. The kingdom's forces look up at the hill and see the Ferdinand district flags waving alongside a massive line of soldiers. Thinking this is elite reinforcement coming to save the day, they charge forward with full ego, ready to check the vibes and finish the fight. Ortho's team sees the Yelanetta squad rushing in and immediately flips the switch to combat mode. Meanwhile, Art is still visibly shaking because this is her first time stepping into a literal war zone. She knows for a fact this won't be an easy dub like the ones Van usually pulls off, but at this point, she has no choice but to go all in. Summoning every ounce of courage she has left, she stands before the group of adventurers and screams at them to buff her with their power so they can save her homeland together. When Ortho asks what the plan is, she decides right then and there to go straight to the front lines and start pressing the enemy. Art's puppetry skills are straight up cracked. She maneuvers the Silver Knight to wipe out a whole squad of Yelanetta soldiers. The adventurer team isn't slouching either, taking out enemies without even breaking a sweat. Kuzala almost gets jumped by a group, but the Silver Knight luckily dives in for the save, though the puppet pays the price by taking a direct hit to its left arm. Just when they think the grunts are handled, Plural drops a reality check. There's still a swarm of war dragons darkening the sky. The entire team freezes up again when they realize there are over 50 dragons circling above. The Yelanetta captain, absolutely losing his mind with rage, orders all the dragons to gang up on the Silver Knight. But just as they dive in for the finish, Art manages to make her puppet slap several of them out of the air with a single move. However, it's a total 1v9 situation, and Art gets cornered, almost taking a hit she definitely can't dodge. Right in the nick of time, a second puppet suddenly spawns in for the save, leaving the entire battlefield stuck in a loading screen for 5 seconds because nobody expected her to dual-wield puppets like a pro. Art knows that running this dual-wielding mode drains her mana faster than an ex-boyfriend changes his mind, so she has to end this match ASAP. Meanwhile, the enemy captain is still convinced she's out of cards and about to log out of the fight for good. But Art isn't playing around. She scrapes the barrel for her last bit of energy to unleash her true peak power. She synchronizes both puppets for a cracked finishing move, deleting half of the remaining war dragons in a single heartbeat. Right at this peak moment, she catches a flashback to her rookie era. Art remembers her old self-doubt, how she used to feel like a total failure because of her puppetry magic, something the nobility looked down on as trash tier and completely unacceptable. However, she believes meeting Van was the ultimate glow-up for her life, as he gassed her up with the confidence to go all in on her magic and level up her stats. Her purple puppet lands one last heaven-shaking slap on the final dragon, sending it straight to the lobby. Seeing their air force completely cooked, The Yelanetta soldiers realize they're finished and speedrun their retreat while the adventurer team goes wild celebrating. Inside the palace, Lady Sharon is still standing there clueless, wondering what supernatural force just saved their necks from the dragons and the ground troops. Just then, Count Ferdinand walks in and drops a massive truth bomb. It was all Art's puppets, the daughter we kicked out because of that very same puppetry magic. The Count is feeling this secondhand cringe from life's irony, realizing the very thing they hated with a passion ended up being their savior. Hearing this, Sharon is completely shook and breaks down in tears, drowning in regret for treating her daughter like garbage. Outside, the adventurer squad is gassing Art up to go meet her parents, insisting they'll definitely flip the script and welcome her back now that she's a war hero. But Art isn't buying it. She knows her parents' toxic trait is their deep-seated bias against her magic. Instead, she shuts it down and makes the call, "Let's head out, squad, Van is waiting." The moment she steps back into Van's village, the locals welcome her like a top-tier idol returning home. Van doesn't hold back the praise, telling her she saved her homeland with major main character energy, but she's still feeling a bit humble. She worries her leadership wasn't as boss or authoritative as the way Van usually runs things. Van tells her to stop overthinking and just be herself instead of trying to act like someone else. He looks her in the eye and drops a welcome home that's so wholesome it actually makes Art tear up. Afterward, Van takes Art on a tour of the brand new inns and general stores he managed to spawn while she was away. As they walk, Van feels completely satisfied with his life choices. He was a bit shaky when he first arrived at this village, but now he's 100% certain he picked the right path. Even though this village is a random mix of different races and personalities, everyone is living together in a total healing vibe. To wrap things up, the whole crew throws a massive steak party to celebrate Art's victory, with everyone partying hard and feasting until they're stuffed. Our man Van takes a moment to get deep, reflecting on the day his old man kicked him out of the empire. Just because he had a talent for crafting, he was labeled trash tier in Exile to be the boss of a broke, middle-of-nowhere village. But honestly, it was a blessing in disguise. That fateful plot twist led him to find his true purpose with a squad of legendary, high-tier friends. Together, the group has built this village to peak levels and slapped down countless enemies in past battles. Looking back, he's actually grateful for the bad luck that dumped him in this place. Just as the emotions are peaking, Esparta spawns in to remind Van it's time to download some knowledge into his brain. To make matters worse, Old Man D jumps in to press him about sword practice, claiming this is a combat meta and if you can't swing a blade, you're cooked. But you guys know Van's vibe, he just wants to live a chill, healing life, so he's not interested in studying or grinding combat stats right now. He pulls a classic vanish and ghosts them in a heartbeat. As he runs, reminiscing about the high-stakes events the village has survived, Van feels a sudden surge of hype. He locks in a new goal to keep full-throttling his own way, turning this neighborhood into an even more elite and livable home for all his brothers and sisters. And just like that, Van's journey of building his kingdom officially wraps up with a total healing finale. Do you guys think his pro-level school skipping deserves the Menace of the Year award? Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any cracked recaps of the next anime series. Peace out, everyone.